welcome to the inspiration video. So I know the lighting is bad, and I'm not going to worry about it because we're mainly going to be looking at pictures of quilts, and then you'll just be talking about pictures of quilts and not pictures of me. Okay, so let's go, and I'm going to show you some things that I like as your first quilt, and then there will also be some downloads for you to be able to download the pattern after class. Okay, let's see what we got. Here's our first quilt. It's just two different kinds of pieces in the middle, and then they're bordered by one fabric on all four sides, and then you just sew those squares together. Easy as can be. And then this is another close-up picture of those squares, so you can see the center is two different kinds of fabric, and then the border. Very easy idea for your first quilt. This next quilt is a basket weave pattern. So you can see that there's four different patterns. So you have the white with the little red flowers bordered with blue fabric. And then there's blue fabric, white with blue flowers bordered by burgundy fabric. And this is a very easy pattern to do, very quick and simple. Here's another example of the same basket weave, but it has the same fabric in the middle of all of the squares, just bordered by brown and then bordered by blue. Now if you take the same basket weave pattern and just make the three stripes in each square be the same width, then you get what we call a rail fence. This is the same rail fence pattern with just a bit of a different configuration to the blocks, so you get a whole different look with the same pattern. This is the same rail fence pattern too, but just configured again in a different way. And also notice how the white draws your eye. I love how you can take the basket weave and the rail fence patterns and just make 100 different quilts out of them by just rearranging the blocks and by playing with the color and what colors pop out to your eyes. This next quilt is also a very easy pattern, just like the baby one in the very beginning of this video, where you make squares so you have a center and then you put a border around it, you put another border around it, and then you just take those large squares and whack them in half and sew them together against the opposing color. Now this quilt is an example of what happens when you don't plan things out very well. So all I did was I took a long piece of fabric and put one border around it and then sewed the rectangles together. I suppose it's pretty in kind of a geometric way, but it's not at all what I intended it to be. This quilt also was super easy, so you can either take the yellow squares and sew extra fabric on two sides, or you can take a yellow square and make one big huge square like the baby quilt in the first picture, and then just cut that into fourths, and then you have your squares. Believe it or not, this pattern is also the same as that last pattern. It's just that the squares are put together in a little bit different configuration, and there's not quite as many fabrics in it. This is called a love knot or a love twist, I think, and it's a super easy pattern. This is another super easy pattern for beginners, and it's called the split 9 patch. So you just take 9 squares of fabric and you sew them together, and then you cut them in fourths. Then you sew them back together and it looks like this. Here's another example where I didn't use quite as many different fabrics, but this is a split 9 patch too. This quilt was super easy. Now it was not supposed to look like this at all when I first started, but I kind of like it after I got it finished. This quilt is also super easy, but I wouldn't do this as my first one. It does take a little bit more planning when you put your rows together. This one was easy also, but it does take a little bit more planning. You can also tell this was a jelly roll quilt because the big pieces of the green part kind of really don't match anything. Here's another example of how you can put it together. Again, a jelly roll, the orange kind of didn't match much of anything. Also, I want you to look at this quilt and see the glaring mistake that I made. Do you see it? I really like this pattern, but it's not something I would do for your first quilt. This is another fun one, but I would not do it as your first quilt. I love bold colors. This was fun and done with Valentine fabric, but again, not your first quilt. In the beginning, I would avoid anything that has triangles in it. Since triangles work on the bias, they are a little bit trickier and not something I would do for your first quilt. Later, you can move on to something like this. Believe it or not, this quilt was amazingly easy to do once you learn the trick. And then you have patterns like this. You know, it looked like a good idea when I bought it, but no, I'd never do it again. This pattern is amazingly simple too. See how I just took the flower, the yellow, and the pink, sewed them all together, and then made squares, cut them in half, inserted the blue in the middle, and made a bigger square. And then you just kind of turn them to a pattern that's pleasing for you. I love this quilt too, but I wouldn't do it as your first because the fabric in the middle, the blue ocean fabric, does have a nap, so you have to be careful. And also because to get the yellow and the green in the right place framing the pictures took a little bit more planning than your first quilt. Shouldn't be quite so much detail. Eventually you'll do a log cabin quilt, very traditional pattern, and there's just so many different ways you can lay it out, and it's a very creative and fun thing to do. But not your first quilt, maybe your third or fourth quilt. Courthouse steps are another traditional quilt pattern, again maybe your fourth or fifth quilt. So I'm excited for you to begin your quilting journey. The possibilities are endless. Unleash your creativity and explore the color wheel, and oh, I know you're just going to have so much fun. Go ahead, take the leap. And then when you're done with your quilts, send me pictures because I can't wait to see them. Enjoy, everyone.